In this video, I'm going to talk about project success criteria, and I will give you a funny example about eating a soup with a spoon. I bring in a spoon to explain the concept. Keep watching and hopefully that you get the whole idea. So I enumerated here a list of things that could be success criteria for your project. And the first one is completing your project. Sometimes, or in many cases, you start a project and you keep continuing working on the project till forever. The project never ends and the customer is never satisfied about this project. If you are working in such a project, then completing the project itself could be considered as a success criteria. Sometimes there are projects who stopped at certain point of time, then they would like to resume and they put a certain budget, and for them completing the project could be a reason to consider the project as successful, especially if there is no kind of major risk in completing the project. There is still some work to be done, and that work is clear to all parties. So this considered as a success criteria in certain project, but in many cases completing the project alone is not considered as a success. For instance, if your project is risky and there is no clue that the project will give value at the end, then killing the project early on is maybe a better decision rather than continuing investing on the project and at the end of the day you don't get any deliverable. So keep in mind that this could be a success criteria as it could not be a success criteria depending on your situation. The second thing is completing the project on time. If completing the project in itself is meaningless, then maybe completing it on time could be a success for your project, and in certain situations it does. Because if we take the example of the World Cup and the stadiums should be ready before the kickoff of the World Cup, then the time is a major constraint and we need to finish working on the stadiums before the start of this big event. So completing the project on time becomes a success criteria for the project. Same thing for the budget. If you have a budget of $20,000 to build an app, and at the end of the day, the project team finishes all this budget without achieving the app, it's called a big failure because the project is not yet completed, or completed but it requires 40,000, not 20,000, and it's a big investment that you did not count for, and completing a project over budget could be considered as a failure in some cases. And this especially when we talk about construction projects as well, because the investment in construction project is heavier than any kind of other projects usually. The fourth point is completing the project within the scope. And here I will bring the example of the spoon. If the project is intended to deliver such a spoon, which is considered as a deliverable or outcome or deliverable. Okay. So if at the end of the project team come up with a fork, then this is out of the scope and the project is a big failure. At the beginning of the project, you might do a lot of effort to explain that you'd like to have some tool to eat the soup, and you did a lot of description, but at the end of the day you got this, and it is considered out of scope of your project, and this is considered as a big failure as well for your project. So if the team corrects their fault and trying to understand that you really need a tool, here the value is a tool to eat the soup. So this is a value. If you bring something that does not give the value, then your project is not successful. So the team could create value. For example, instead of giving you a fork which will not serve you, they could give you this spoon. And they said, we created value, we give you a spoon at the end of the day, but you want a bigger one. And maybe in your scope, you did not do a lot of description how you want it to be. And especially it's difficult for many projects to describe your end product or the end value to the project team. Even though you did your best, at the end of the project, you got something else rather than what you expected. And in this case, you get this spoon, which could be used, which creates value, but it doesn't satisfy the customer. It's not the thing that the customer is looking for. They are looking for a bigger one, and that's could also be a success criteria. So you can conclude through this example that the success criteria of a project is not just completing the project on time, on budget, or within scope, or creating the value, but also satisfying the customer. And we can have a combination of different criteria. These are some constraints we might have. We could have the quality as a constraint. We could have the risk as a constraint as well. And we should take all this into considerations and create the success criteria early on in our project, how to define it and do our best in this stage, because it's critical for the success of your project. The project could not succeed without defining what is success looks like.